Kick it off. Hey, welcome to Friday Live, HPK Provident. I'm Colin. That's Brian. And Mike's down south, and he is still intact after Hurricane Ian swept through. Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit last time, but, everybody in our office and our immediate family and friends seems to be doing okay, minus some minimal damage from the storm. But I know there's a ton of folks who are still affected, and definitely thoughts and prayers from us to everybody that's still dealing with that aftermath. I know I'm getting some emails from some folks we work with who just got power back yesterday, and I know there's still a lot of work to be done there. But on a more positive note, we were just talking about our favorite movies here. It was kind of all over the spectrum. Not very useful for anything we're going to talk about today, but if you have a favorite movie, throw it down in the comments. We'd love to hear about it, and we'll give you a very biased score on if we think it's a good movie or not.
I went with Saving Private Ryan. I don't think you can go wrong with that one.
No, that's absolute classic.
Yeah.
Mike and I are still undecided, so
it's too hard to just pick one. It depends what kind of mood I'm in.
Yeah, good point. That's a good point.
But Saving Private Ryan was definitely on my short list. So, a couple things going on today. Mike's going to talk about the markets. We're going to talk about the dreaded Fafsa form that is really a bane in everybody's life. There's no way around that. Just a couple quick observations on that. Some interesting points about 529 disbursements when you're going to fill those out. And, if multiple folks in your family own 529s for kids, there's some things to think about there. But that's what we've got on the agenda today. As a reminder, nothing we talk about here should be used as a specific recommendation. We always recommend you seek professional advice, whether that be tax, legal, or financial, from your trusted professionals. And if that's not us, we would love it to be. So give us a ring. But Mike, you want to catch us up on what we saw in the market? I know we had a couple days that looked a little less gloomy than we've had recently, but for the most part,
certainly relative.
It's very relative, and it's certainly, it certainly seems like it's matching the weather outside here in Pittsburgh, and a bit gloomy today as well. So kick us off, Mike.
Yeah, so the first 2 days of the quarter were absolutely fantastic, with both days up about 2.5% plus on the S&P 500. We saw bond yields come down quite a bit, especially at the longer end, and the dollar even declined a couple percent off its highs. So it was looking real good, but then yesterday we started to see a sell-off, which looks to be continued today on a pretty decent jobs report. So like I've talked about in the past, good news is bad news and bad news is good news in terms of what the Fed is going to do. So speaking of the jobs report, non-farm payrolls came in a little bit higher than consensus, but lower than last month, with a slight downtick in the unemployment rate and the participation rate. So not really what we want to see from the Fed. We really need that participation rate to continue to go upward. Average hourly earnings were not bad, in line with last month, but slightly lower than consensus. So that feeds into inflation quite a bit. So if that continues to decline, that would be a good thing in terms of the Fed. But overall, the job market is still very healthy, and we haven't really seen any pain in the labor market. So that's going to allow the Fed to keep hiking rates. We heard from some Fed members this week, and they continue to push back from the pausing or pivoting scenario. My opinion is they'll probably go with the rate hikes for the next two meetings. November is the next one, and then December. And then I think they're going to pause. I mean, it's going to be a high enough level that they should really pause from there and kind of see what effect those rate hikes that have taken place actually have on the economy. They have a delayed factor in what the damage they'll do. We even had heard from the Transportation Department from the United Nations and come out and say how damaging what the Fed is doing is being on the rest of the world, especially in those emerging market economies. So it's not, like, in my opinion, why cause something to break and then they'll have to aggressively cut rates? Why don't they just kind of pause, let inflation come down over time? I mean, the Fed funds rate is high enough. They've already done historically aggressive rate hikes so far this year. So why make a worse mistake now to correct an earlier one? As we all know, they were still buying bonds in the beginning of this year. But it's all going to come down to inflation. We'll get the CPI report next week. I think it's on Thursday for the month of September, and then we'll get retail sales on Friday. So those readings could have material impact on the Fed's future rate hike path. But like they've mentioned in previous meetings, they're going to need more than 1 month to make any real decisions. Overall on the market, key levels to watch, pretty much that previous low on the S&P 500 of 35.88, which is also coinciding with a 200-week moving average. So the 200-week is interesting looking back like 10 plus years. It held up in 2011. Well, we dipped a little bit below it in 2011, but overall it was pretty much intact. 2016, 2018. So let's see if we can hold it this year and hopefully move higher in the months to come.
Well, I know we talked about the Fed having this soft landing, and I was very hopeful that we turned into a little bit of a Captain Sully moment and landed this thing on the Hudson at the brink of disaster. But it seems like
Another great movie.
That is another great movie. But it seems like we've. I mean, what's your take on that, Mike? Has the plane crashed and burned, or do you think they'll be able to pull out a Captain Sully and get this thing to actually curb inflation here and try? I think we're past soft landing at this point, but
I mean, I think it really depends on what the Fed does. If they pause after the December meeting, we're at say 4.25% on the Fed funds rate, and just wait to see how it plays out. There's a chance that the economy slows but doesn't drop severely. But if they keep raising rates to 5%, then no. I think hard landing is the only outcome at that point.
Well, there's some thought that the Fed's going to go on a little bit of a pause because the Fed does not like to appear to be involved in politics much. And so after the election, which will be in November, there have been other cycles where the Fed kind of goes into the background, not wanting to appear to be favoring one party or the other by making drastic moves. So possibly we get to December and they go on pause for a lot of different reasons. The ones that you had mentioned, and the idea that they'll kind of go in the background a little bit.
And then the other thing they need to also think about is the debt servicing costs. The longer they stay at elevated rates, each year when those bonds come due, that's going to be higher interest rate that they have to pay.
Right.
So I don't think they can afford to keep them high for forever. There's just too much debt.
I think those are all great points. And when we talk about historically high inflation, there's no better segue into higher education than historically high inflation. Because if we look at the rate,
debt servicing and high inflation. Yeah,
debt servicing, high inflation, I think that's a perfect segue into the FAFSA form. We're talking about college costs that have historically far exceeded historical inflation. So, one thing to think about on that FAFSA form, one, you got to fill it out. Deadline's open. Everybody get
Go on to studentaid.gov. All one word, studentaid.gov. It's all right on there. You can fill everything out there. There's even a possibility to link with the IRS's website so you can bring in your tax forms.
Oh, perfect.
On that studentaid.gov is where the FAFSA form is. So you fill that out, indicate which schools you want that to go to. Colleges, universities, technical schools, things along those lines. And from there, they'll go ahead and send it right out to those schools.
Perfect. And, one thing to think about. So part one, you got to fill out the FAFSA, and hopefully there's some financial aid available for your kids that are going off to school, technical institutions, things like that.
And it's worth it for everybody.
Absolutely.
To do it. It really doesn't take that long. Even if you don't think you will qualify, the FAFSA form is reviewed by a lot of higher education institutions for not only federal aid, but for the aid that they might be able to provide, scholarships and grants and that kind of thing. So even if you don't think you qualify on the financial side, it still makes sense to go ahead and fill that out.
I would say absolutely. And then when you get to the point where it's time to pay for it, a lot of folks we work with have 529 or college savings plans. If you find yourself in a position where you own 529 plans for your kids, and maybe there's another party such as grandparents that own 529s for kids, one interesting thing is you're better off using your 529 assets first and having your grandparents use their 529 assets later. The simple reason for that is your personal 529 assets for the benefit of your kids is treated more favorably than your grandparents' 529 assets that they use for the benefit of your kids. But your grandparents' 529 assets that they plan to use for the benefit of your kids do not become reportable until they take a distribution from it. So in essence, if you take a distribution from grandparents' 529s to pay for kids' college expenses, that next year, that becomes reportable at a higher percentage than your individual 529 plans. That's, one interesting thing about college funding that kind of gets overlooked often. And if you need some clarification or help on that, certainly reach out.
That's because the Fafsa Forms it's looking 2 years back.
Mm-hmm.
So when you fill out the FAFSA now, which came out October 1st, is when you can start to fill that out on studentaid.gov. That's for 2023. They're going to look back at the tax returns in your income from 2021. So it's a 2-year look back, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there's money coming out of different plans, they're going to look at it 2 years behind.
Absolutely.
So. And there's actually a lot of resources on studentaid.gov. It talks about the grants that are available. Grants don't have to be paid back. Loans do. So there are subsidized federal loans. There are unsubsidized federal loans, depending on income levels. It also talks about the PLUS loans, which are for parents and for graduate students. So it's a really, really good resource. And it's fairly helpful. On the lower right-hand side of studentaid.gov is a picture of a little owl, and his name is Aiden the owl. And if you click on that, you can get a lot of instructions on how to walk through the FAFSA form and look at different loans that are available to students and to their parents. However, it would be a little bit remiss if we didn't say, if you have the time, if you have young children and you have the time before they go into the next part of their education to save a whole bunch of money, in our opinion, that really is the best route. But if your student is going to school and it's going to be a higher cost than what you expected, and you didn't have the time or the returns, if you will, to save up enough, then you get into the not only the federal student loans, but there are also private loans, and there's a lot of different methods for looking for money for college. But if you got the time and you got the money to save, it's really, our opinion, best to not have to go into the whole loan process.
And when you get into the loan side of things, I wouldn't worry too much, because the government, historically has been very good at finding a way to take our money creatively.
Yes.
So, I wouldn't worry too much about finding some government loans to find access to. They're more than willing to make some money on those. But definitely the earlier you can start, the better off you'll be. And those 529 plans are about one of the most flexible vehicles for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the FAFSA, for that form, you're going to need tax returns, W-2s, or sources of income, 1099s, W-2s, whatever that might be. You're going to need statements for your bank accounts and your investment accounts. Mm-hmm. And as Colin had alluded to earlier, for the parents, the assets that they are providing through the FAFSA are considered a little bit less for what is called the expected family contribution, the EFC. Whereas the child, the student, their assets and their income are accounted a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And for grandparents, even more so. So it's a relatively complicated process, but it can be simplified if you stay organized on these things. So that's the FAFSA, which is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. That's why I share our Office Space meme from earlier in the week, because I think everybody kind of, very similar to TPS reports.
And you want to fill out the FAFSA form each year, by the way. So, and again, it's because they're looking at prior years. So for 2023, they'll look at 2021 income. For 2024, they'll look at your 2022. So you'll want to fill that out every year. And we kind of laugh about it, but it's really not that onerous, and it's worth it if there are either federal, private, loans or grants that might be available to your child. In the institution that they're going to, they might have monies available as well. If you go to Harvard or whatever, they got a huge endowment, so you would think there would be some few bucks that would be.
That's not how it works.
No. Fair enough. All right.
The endowment discussion, I think, will be an entirely separate Friday Live at some point, because it is very fascinating how large the endowments of those larger institutions are.
Incredible.
And there's this. I feel like there's a relationship between the cost to attend and the endowment size. They're pretty much right in line.
They are.
Higher the cost to attend, the higher the endowment.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fairly interesting. So there's we may revisit that in another topic, because I have a lot of interesting to say, but for the sake of time today, I think we'll leave it there. Mike, as always, thanks for the input. Brian, always love sitting here and having a conversation.
Studentaid.gov. That's go to studentaid.gov. There's a couple ways to do it. You can fill it out online. You can print it out. You can mail it in. The FAFSA, that is. You can do it on. There's an app as well. It's My Student Aid is the name of the app. So you can do all those.
Perfect. And then for our clients over on the east side of the city, we'll be over in Indiana next week. Those invites went out. So, if you didn't get one and you're on that side of things and you want to join us for dinner, just make sure you let us know. A couple other, housekeeping things. If there's specific topics you guys want to hear about, we're always open, and we'd love to know what they are so we can work them in here to our schedule. And as always, we will see you next week. Stay safe, stay healthy, have a fantastic weekend, everybody. Take care.
Bye.